Thanks for joining us for this interview spotlight from the Global SCM Leaders Conference here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Greg Thompson and joined by Inbound Logistics publisher Keith Biondo. Keith, thanks for joining us.
My
today,
pleasure.
You gave a really interesting presentation about over here and over there, and really talking about a lot about our infrastructure, about where we could go. Some really fascinating stuff. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, Inbound Logistics is a magazine that started 30-some years ago, and the idea was to help American shippers better match demand to supply. Okay, and obviously throughout that value chain, there are a lot of important touch points. Certainly, drivers are on the front lines. Certainly, technology overarching all of it is extremely important. But the backbone of all of that is really our infrastructure, our transportation and logistics infrastructure. So, Greg, I'm sure you're aware that the last time we had a national transportation strategy was in 1950.
Absolutely.
Dwight David Eisenhower, and the reason why he started the highway system as we have it today is that he was a young lieutenant and was involved in a convoy of trucks for the first time, which were heading west to California from the east. And I believe it was 1916, and there was no real nationwide interstate infrastructure to speak of. And those trucks were sorely tested to make that trip. No truck stops, no spare parts, no rest stations, in many cases no roads. And that formulated in his mind, his young mind as a young lieutenant in the U.S. Army, the idea that transportation was extremely important. And then, of course, during World War II, he looked at the German Autobahn and he realized quickly how important road infrastructure is in terms of a lot of things, not the least of which is the ability to project goods around the country and certainly around the world. So when he came back, he instituted the highway system as it is today, and of course Harry Truman followed up with it later. So that I guess that is the genesis, and really in these past 50-some years, the only national strategy that we've had for transportation and logistics to this day.
Well, and as you know, from Eisenhower's plan, that interstate system was planned for a 75-year lifespan, and we are now entering the final third of that. And there's evidence. I know you live in New York, and there's crumbling bridges and the infrastructure, not just with the interstate, but just there's so many issues that we need to address. And you talk about a public works initiative that really needs to happen. But when you look at how many things go on the road, and I know a lot of things go on rail, but there's only so much capacity that rail can handle. So to have a thriving economy, you have to have an infrastructure. I know you spoke about that today, about the over there and over here, and comparing and contrasting, because I know when you look at a country like China that is spending billions of dollars on infrastructure.
Well, that's exactly right, Greg. One of the things that I pointed to was the fact that, for example, we've had what we call TARP. There were 3 funding sessions by the United States government, transportation infrastructure recovery, and it amounted to roughly $2 billion, which is a sizable amount of money. But when I gave my talk earlier today, what I pointed to was the fact that in China, they have an idea that they want to project not only a domestic transportation and logistics strategy, but also a global logistics strategy. And I gave an example of a Chinese port company developing a port and spending $10 billion to do it in sub-Saharan Africa. $10 billion, one port, and here we've had 3 iterations of TARP, and we were talking about $2 billion. And sadly, our research at Inbound Logistics has shown that depending upon whether it was TARP 1, TARP 2, or TARP 3, and you can find all this information on our website, inboundlogistics.com, the percentage that our sector, the transportation and logistics sector, garnered from that was 26 to 30%. There was more set aside for passenger light rail systems that are underutilized, as our research has shown, and actually even bike paths, okay, which we have, and I referenced in my presentation earlier, in New York City, in one of the most traffic-prone areas of the country.
Yes.
They spent millions of dollars putting in bike lanes.
Well, and speaking of that, and in New York City, the Tappan Zee Bridge is one, just an example, and I know we're getting a little bit local here, but just an example of something that's going to require millions of dollars to repair. And when you look at, I know that there was a study done about 10 years ago, the Transportation for Tomorrow group,
Right.
and they came to the conclusion that it was going to take about $200 billion over 10 years, and to deal
Just
with
maintain.
it. Yeah,
Just
to maintain, exactly.
Well, there's maintenance, of course, which is important, which we're not doing because we redirect funds that have been set aside for highway maintenance, bridge maintenance, port maintenance, railhead maintenance, and so on. And we direct them to the political flavor of the day in many cases to score some political three-pointers. That is contrasted with, let's say, for example, as my talk focused on, China, where they have a long-term view, where everyone has domestic issues that they must deal with, but they realize that transportation and logistics leadership is so important that they set those issues aside. So, for example, one of the things I spoke about earlier today was that the Chinese decided to build a port on an island that did not exist, put in a bridge, established the road links, established the rail links, and they said they were going to do it in 5 years. Now, they ran a little over 5 years, and it's going to be continuing to be expanded for, I guess, till 2020 as they project, maybe a little longer. But over here, we can't get funding set aside for even the most mundane thing. And if we get back to a national transportation strategy, we've seen that mostly the good things that are being done are at the grassroots level, at the state, local level, or through public-private partnerships. For example, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's been 100 years since a new bridge was built between the U.S. and Mexico. And that bridge will be coming online in a few months. But that's 100 years, okay? So one of the things that I focused on in my talk is that I think that we're doing good works on the front line. Obviously, there are plenty of great supply chain practitioners. There are plenty of great drivers. There are plenty of great warehouse operators and so on. And certainly, there are plenty of great organizations that are trying to foster investment in our transportation and logistics infrastructure. But at the 10,000-foot level, in terms of strategy, I don't see from the federal government any kind of national or even global logistics strategy as it relates to our ability to expand as an economy, as it relates to our ability to keep workers working, to grow. I just don't see it. And in some cases, they're actually hindering some of the things that you would expect that a government ought to promote. They're doing exactly the opposite of what the Chinese are doing in many, many instances.
Well, and when you talk about global competitiveness and you talk about political gridlock, and we're dangerously getting close, and I don't mean to say the sky is falling, but when you talk about political gridlock, it could force actual gridlock on our roads because we're ignoring this. So I guess my question being this: if I had a magic wand and could put you in charge and say, I need Eisenhower 2, what do you think needs to happen, and how can it happen?
Well, I think it's a question of mindset. I think that our government and many of our leaders in Congress don't understand. They don't understand what the benefits of a good transportation and logistics system are. They have their own worldview, and they obviously control the purse strings. So I think the first thing that I would do is to try to make the need very well known to those that are making policy. And what that requires is a lot of people in our position and a lot of people listening to this broadcast to write letters, talk to their political contacts if they have any. One of the things that I'm doing is I'm going around to schools and I'm trying to get the next generation of people to understand the importance of maintaining good supply chain and logistics infrastructure. So those are the things that I think we can do to change mindset. In terms of funding, okay, there's money being spent on certain things that would be nice to have, like bike paths and light rail systems in certain areas that are underutilized. but there are, for example, some projects that would do a greater good for a greater amount of people over a longer term if we just redeployed assets to those things. So I think the other thing that I would do is to have them change their priorities. Not necessarily spend more money, but spend money on things that would do the greatest good for the most people. I'll give you a quick example. Not too long ago, we had a stimulus package that released millions of dollars to the U.S. consumers. And the idea was to stimulate jobs growth. Well, what happened when you just dump that amount of money into the economy and give it to consumers? They did spend money, but the jobs they generated was wherever flat screen TVs are built, okay? So wouldn't it have been better for the longer term, recognizing the political realities are tough, to take those kinds of monies and invest them in something that would do the most good for the most people over the longest term, to generate good jobs, to generate great economic activity, to expand this economy. I think that's what should be done.
Well, we'll end on that note. That was fantastic. Keith, thank you so much for joining us on this interview spotlight here at the Global SCM Conference.